2024 marks something of a reset for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Rather than operating under the mandate of short-lived CEO, anthropomorphized film Bob Chapek to release as much content as possible as quickly as possible, Marvel, under the stewardship of returning CEO Bob Iger, pumped the brakes on their output, only releasing a handful of streaming projects and a single blockbuster film. The two most notable being the small screen revival of X-Men the Animated Series, X-Men 97, and on the big screen, the highest grossing R-rated film of all time at $1.3 billion, Deadpool and Wolverine. While both X-Men 97 and Deadpool and Wolverine served as exceptional returns to form for Marvel Studios, X-Men 97 was marred by an ugly controversy: the alleged sexual misconduct of the series creator and showrunner Beau DeMayo, an OnlyFans creator accused of sending unwanted homoerotic images of himself in quote-unquote hero poses to male members of his staff. For its part, Deadpool and Wolverine remained relatively controversy-free, aside from a few attention-seeking criticisms from spurned, problematic former castmate TJ Miller, the character actor and comedian who portrayed Deadpool's best friend Weasel in the first two Deadpool films. Deadpool and Wolverine racked up its impressive, blood-soaked bag without ruffling too many feathers behind the scenes. Or so we thought. Though there's plenty in Deadpool's third raunchy R-rated romp that could potentially be construed as offensive, the opening alone finds Deadpool willfully undermining the powerful conclusion of James Mangold's Logan by murdering a bunch of faceless TVA agents through an act of borderline necrophilia, all to the tune of NSYNC's Bye Bye Bye, a song Hugh Jackman's Wolverine canonically hates.
I don't like uncomfortable silences.
What are you doing?
The latest source of controversy doesn't stem from the sexually tinged violence
Mangold tried!
Wade Wilson's graphic explanation of self-love involving Disney's intellectual property.
That's when you get those toy Hulk hands, right? And then you look down and you just ravage the midsection.
I get it. Okay, thank you.
Or even its transformation of longtime MCU poster boy Chris Evans into a foul-mouthed version of his previous non-MCU Marvel character Johnny Storm.
And I'll tell you what she can do.
I'm listening.
She can lick my damn ring clean and kick rocks all the way to ball.
Rather, the latest controversy surrounding the film stems from the least objectionable thing in the entire movie: the golden-locked, breathtakingly handsome character known simply as Nicepool. How exactly could anyone take umbrage with the chaste, cloyingly Canadian iteration of the merc with the mouth? Well, for the answer to that question, we must turn to a different, diametrically opposed film and controversy entirely. Released in early August, It Ends With Us, a romantic drama based off of Colleen Hoover's best-selling novel of the same name, debuted in theaters. Despite heavy subject matter contending with domestic violence as well as a poor critical reception, the film was a minor financial success at the box office, one that would have no doubt faded into obscurity after its initial run if it weren't for the very public drama between the two stars of the film: its co-lead director and producer Justin Baldoni and its protagonist, Lily Bloom, played by Blake Lively, who just so happens to be married to the architect of the Deadpool franchise, Ryan Reynolds. At the time of this writing, the beef between Baldoni and Blake has escalated to the point where both stars have taken legal action against each other, Blake filing a legal complaint against Baldoni for sexual harassment and allegedly hiring a PR crisis manager to run a smear campaign against her, and with Baldoni suing both Lively and Reynolds for civil extortion, defamation, and invasion of privacy. Of course, how the two high-profile celebrities got to this point basically boils down to a bunch of he said, she said finger-pointing, but here are the bullet points. Lively signed on to the film with Baldoni, an actor who got a start on the CW series Jane the Virgin, co-starring and directing. During filming, the two actors didn't get along, and alleged sexual harassment took place. Though if this set footage, leaked by Baldoni's team, is anything to go by, this alleged harassment was more likely just Baldoni attempting to get Lively, his romantic co-star, to be romantic with him in the romance film she agreed to star in.
And then let's just do one almost super close.
Yeah. But I think you should start talking. Don't give it to them. They want it, don't give it to them.
Score.
Just keep restraint.
Yeah, just do a little bit of restraint.
Seriously though, her not wanting to kiss him is like Tom Cruise not wanting to run in the next Mission Impossible movie. That's why you're here. That said, one leaked set video does not give us the whole picture and does not in any way invalidate Lively's claims. After a break due to the writers and actors strikes, Lively, Baldoni, and Reynolds, offering emotional support, sat down for a meeting where Lively demanded changes on the set, a few of which include requesting that Baldoni no longer discuss his corn addiction with her, that there would be no more adding of sex scenes of any sort that weren't in the script, and that Baldoni would no longer pretend to commune with Lively's dead father. If that last one's true, this guy's a real asshole. My hat's off to you, sir. Following the meeting, the work environment improved, but Lively took creative control of the film, hiring her own editors with the backing of Sony and allegedly recruiting her husband to punch up a scene. Allegedly, in retaliation, Baldoni hired crisis manager Melissa Nathan, the same crisis manager employed by Drake after Kendrick Lamar accused him of inappropriate relations with young girls, a move Drake of course saw coming and was all part of his plan. To be accused of being a pedophile? And Johnny Depp during his extended feud with his ex-wife Amber Heard. With Nathan's aid, it's alleged that Baldoni ran a smear campaign against Lively, one that may have been behind the negative backlash she received throughout the run-up to the release of the film, i.e. the attention drawn to her tone-deaf promotion of her and her husband's booze brands, Betty Buzz and Aviation Gin, while also promoting a film about domestic violence, which one could argue is almost exclusively fueled by alcohol. And even more damaging, the release of an old interview where Lively cruelly bullies a reporter for congratulating her on her pregnancy.
First of all, congrats on your little bump.
Congrats on your little bump.
Do you guys love wearing those kind of clothes that you...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, working in digital...
Everyone wants to talk about the clothes, but I wonder if they would ask the men about the clothes.
I would.
What a Which brings us to the present and the pair's current legal battle. But what does all this have to do with Deadpool and Wolverine's resident ugly pooch owner? That particular detail came to light on January 14th of this year when Baldoni's attorney sent a legal hold letter to Bob Iger and the head of Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, asking the studio to preserve any documentation regarding the creation of Nicepool, a character Baldoni claims was created to mock him. Now, I may be a simple country YouTuber, but I think it's safe to say that Baldoni's latest complaint has no legal leg to stand on. At no point in the runtime of Deadpool and Wolverine is Baldoni's name ever dropped. Aside from a masked cameo by Blake Lively as the bloodthirsty Ladypool, no one from the production of It Ends With Us is even in the film, and logistically, Nicepool was already part of the Deadpool and Wolverine script before It Ends With Us was even in production. That said, just because Baldoni's case isn't backed by the law doesn't mean his accusation isn't true. So our question then becomes, did Ryan Reynolds really wedge a character into his billion-dollar film for the purpose of mocking a guy who made a pass at his wife? The short answer to that question? Yes. Yes, he did. I, of course, can't definitively back up that claim, but when you look at the evidence on screen, it's pretty apparent what Reynolds is doing. Sure, it's true that Nicepool is always a part of the Deadpool and Wolverine script, but the actual scenes featuring the character were shot after the writers and actors strikes, which means they occurred after Baldoni, Lively, and Reynolds' contentious meeting. Given the timing and Reynolds' penchant for improvisation, there was plenty of time for the A-lister to take shots at Baldoni, which he does in the film both figuratively and literally. To start, we have Nicepool's appearance. The script doesn't detail Nicepool's hairstyle, simply referring to the character as a god angel. But in the film, Nicepool rocks the second most unfortunate male hairstyle next to the mullet, the man bun, a style favored by Baldoni and greasy yoga instructors the world over. Then there are the references to Nicepool's status as a feminist. Aside from his acting career, Baldoni also considers himself a social activist. At least that's how he refers to himself in the back of his book, Man Enough, Undefining My Masculinity. Methinks doth protest too much. Through his book, podcast of the same name, and activism, Baldoni fashions himself as a feminist champion, a notion undermined by Lively's sexual harassment claims. Nicepool is similarly undermined in his very introduction, making a sexist remark Deadpool Prime objects to before excusing it through his self-identification as a feminist.
She just had a baby too and can't even tell. I don't think you're supposed to say that. That's okay. I identify as a feminist. Right.
There's also a clip from the film's gag reel where Nicepool insists his true calling is to profit from a feminist podcast.
My calling is to one day host a podcast that monetizes the women's movement.
A clear swipe at Baldoni's podcast, which fell apart following Lively's claims. Unrelated to Nicepool, we also get a scene where Deadpool angrily calls for an intimacy coordinator after getting face by Cassandra Nova's fingers.
My brain could taste your fingers and they tasted like hate.
And where in God's name is the intimacy coordinator?
Admittedly, this could be a general jab at the state of sexual politics in the film industry. It could also be a pointed reference to Lively's reasonable demands on the set of It Ends With Us. Either way, the barb is either a general or specific comment on Baldoni's alleged conduct. Conduct the alleged cinematic iteration of Baldoni pays for when Deadpool and Lady Deadpool inadvertently team up to unalive him brutally near the climax of the film.
Say it louder!
Are all of these examples essentially circumstantial, boiling down to little more than rumors and conjecture? Absolutely. that as someone who spent more time than he'd like to admit researching a controversy surrounding a film he doesn't care about, an actress he doesn't like, and an actor he'd previously never heard of, I think it's safe to say that Baldoni's claims are true, and that Ryan Reynolds did indeed utilize his own blockbuster film to sneak diss him in front of millions of people. But I also think it's safe to ask, who cares? From what I've seen in research, Blake Lively appears to be a deeply unpleasant person. A rude, entitled, and difficult Hollywood starlet more concerned with furthering her own brands than her craft. That said, I also don't actually know her and admit that's unfair to judge someone from out-of-context clips that highlight their worst moments, especially when they're pregnant. But even if Lively's as unpleasant as she seems, that doesn't mean Baldoni's a victim. In my experience, men like Baldoni who loudly claim to be feminists by creating art that exploits and sexualizes women before patting themselves on the back for doing so are usually sexist creeps that eventually get caught out. Joss Whedon, anyone? So if Baldoni did in fact harass Lively, he deserves to be made fun of in the most public way possible. And honestly, you could do worse than being characterized as a really nice guy in one of the biggest box office hits of the year. However you slice it, the controversy regarding It Ends With Us makes both Lively and Baldoni look bad. But as far as I'm concerned, Ryan Reynolds comes out of this whole thing clean as a whistle.
Clean as a whistle, sharp as a thistle, best in all Westminster, yeah!
Aside from the Rocks and Millers of the world, both Tim and TJ, Reynolds has a fairly sterling reputation as a Hollywood nice guy. While there's plenty of time left for that reputation to tarnish, or for him to pull a Tom Hanks and make a feudal push to get the world to understand that he does in fact have the capacity to be cranky, he cranks, this act in no way undermines his reputation. However you feel about Lively, she is Reynolds' wife, and like any good husband, he stood up for her behind the scenes and in front of the camera, using his clout to help his wife hijack Baldoni's film before unaliving him on screen to steal his ugly dog and his 2 gold-plated 50 caliber Desert Eagle pistoleros. Let me know what you think about the Nicepool Baldoni situation down in the comment section below. Like me, are you convinced that Reynolds was making fun of Baldoni with the character, or do you think it's some massive misunderstanding? Let me know. I'd also like to ask that if you liked this video, please click the like button, press subscribe, ring the bell, and share it with a friend. I'd like to say thanks in advance. Thanks for watching, and until next time,